Didn't expect to have 40 people come to a 10 a.m. session on land access. So thanks for being brave and wanting to gain some knowledge on this topic. I feel like the title is a little bit bold, Unlock Your Farming Future, but we're going to go with that. And the strategic approach to land access piece is what our program, Illinois FarmLink, has come up with as like a kind of roadmap to approach the land access journey. So it feels like a really big topic. I heard somebody say the other day, like, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And I feel like I'm really stuck on that metaphor. So that's kind of what this presentation is going to do today, is try to break the land access journey down into bite-sized chunks. So we can go to the next slide. So I am Jeannie. I'm with Illinois FarmLink. I use she, her pronouns. And I work as the Northern Navigator for Illinois FarmLink. So advising farmers and landowners in Northern Illinois around their land or farmer search. And we'll get more into that at the end of the presentation. But I come to this work after 5 years of being a beginning farmer myself, and wondering how I was ever going to gain access to land, making $16 an hour, and then supposed to be purchasing land at $17,000 an acre or whatever it is at now. So, and like feeling really overwhelmed by the topic of land access and like all of the different complex pieces to learn, like leasing, loans, buying rural property, like any of those things felt pretty out of reach for me. And I felt pretty out of touch with them. So through my work with Illinois FarmLink, ideally, land access feels a little bit less jargon heavy, a little bit more approachable. And that's what we're going to try to do with the presentation today. So first, I'm going to tell you about the Land Connection, which is the program that we're a part of. So we can go to the next slide, Justin. So the Land Connection is like our larger parent organization. They're a nonprofit based in Champaign, Illinois. And the way that they describe their programming is from soil to supper plate. So starting with land access, helping more farmers gain secure, affordable land tenure, moving on to farmer education. So if you've been to the Organic Grain Conference or Midwest Mechanical Field Day, that's programs from the Land Connection. And then they run a winter and summer farmers market in Champaign. And then our program is Illinois FarmLink. So then that's on the next slide. And our program is broken down into these three buckets. So land linking program started in like New England back in the 90s, trying to match farmers and landowners together. And we adopted that system and started this program in Northeast Illinois. And we try to do that through our online profile system, which is like a dating app for farmers and landowners. So you can create a profile with what you need as a farmer, and then ideally you meet other landowners who like might have what you're looking for. But I would say that it's not a perfect system, because you need a lot of profiles on there for that to work. So then we kind of started in these two other buckets, with advising and education and networking. And advising is now the majority of what we do. So we offer free advising services with like one of our regional navigators. So I would advise you if you're in Northern Illinois, and then we have somebody in Central and Southern. And we'll work with you throughout the whole land access journey. Sometimes we work with people for years and have monthly calls with them. And like, I would think of us kind of as a coach or like an accountability partner, and just helping you work through that roadmap, checking in on like what we talked about the last time. Were you able to make any progress? And kind of like being alongside you throughout that journey. And then we also do education and networking stuff like these presentations, and different like resources that we create. So that's our two, that's like the Land Connection and Illinois Farm Link. But I would love to do some intros in the chat. Uh, so I don't think we can all come off and come on video and introduce ourselves today. So maybe if everybody, Justin, you can go to the next slide. And if everybody in the chat just wants to put their, oh, that's the very end of the presentation. Hold on. While Justin does that, if people want to just put their name and pronouns, yeah, here we go, in the chat. And then where you're growing, like whether that's in your backyard or if you're farming somewhere, and then your level of farming experience. So we're breaking that down by aspiring, beginning, and established, as you can see on this slide. So feel free to share that in the chat if you want. It gives me a good idea of like who is in the room and where you might be at on your land access journey. And then at the same time, Justin, if you want to share the first poll, and we're gonna that like ask some questions about the land access journey and like the barriers that you might be facing. And so Justin's gonna launch that. Yeah, perfect.
And also just wanted to, for those who have come into the room maybe a little bit later than the 10 a.m. Slot, just want to let you know for questions and answers, we're going to do it a little bit more organically. So as questions arise throughout Jeannie's presentation, feel free to put a question in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on it, and Jeannie as well, and we'll try to answer that in real time.
Thank you guys for sharing all your intros and everything. I guess we'll let this poll run for a little bit longer and then share the results with everyone. All right. I think I'm going to end this poll and then, yeah, I think I can share the results. So, I don't know if everybody can see that, but this is what I was expecting to see. Yeah, so for question one, is land access a challenge? Yes, 68%. Nobody answered no. And then what are the top challenges you face around land access? Access to capital, confusion around land access topics, overwhelm, and other. There wasn't an option to write in other. So if people want to write in any other barriers that they face around land access, feel free to do that. And so then we can go to the next slide. And the reason that I expected that these results would be this is because one, I've been working with farmers around land access for the last 3 years, but also because Young Farmers surveyed 10,000 young farmers across the country in 2022, and access to land was the first issue, and then first barrier, and access to capital was the second. So I guess I just wanted to start off the presentation with saying that we shouldn't be here. It's really frustrating that we're here, that like land access is this much of a challenge for beginning farmers, and that we're like trying to figure out all of these different little hacks and ways to like rig the system and figure out how to gain secure, affordable access to land. So that's one. And two is just like a grounding in the fact that land access brings a lot into a lot of like really strong emotions, shame, frustration, rage, impatience, confusion, all of those. And so I just want to acknowledge that like those feelings are here. I feel those around land access, and yeah, hopefully with this little strategy that we have, it makes it a little bit easier, makes the overwhelm feel a little bit less overwhelming. And yeah, let's jump into the roadmap that we have. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, this is just what we're going to do. We're also going to share real farmer stories from people that we've worked with. And then at the end, I'll talk more about Illinois FarmLink and what we do and how we can help you in your land search. Yeah, perfect. So I've probably said land access journey a bunch of different times already in the presentation, and it's like, well, what even is that? So we know that land is central to our livelihoods as growers, as farmers, as land stewards. But it's kind of this topic that we don't, as farmers, get much education on. We might get education on seeding or crop planting or soil science, like all of those kinds of things. Land access, not as much. And we call it a journey because finding the right piece of land at the right price with the right arrangement to fit your farming needs is going to be a journey. And we want to make sure that people have a strategy to break that down, and that also you give yourself plenty of time because it may take a while. And so that brings me to the next slide, which is the steps of the journey that we use. So we've broken it down into like 5 parts. The first is prepare, and then search, secure, steward, and future planning. And the 2 areas that we're going to focus on the most today are the prepare and the search parts of the land access journey. So this is the first farmer story that we wanted to share. Greta Goetz, which is in Pecatonica, Illinois, northwestern Illinois. So Greta searched for 4 years and had like a really specific strategy of every single night was in the habit of checking listings. And we share this story right at the beginning to highlight those 2 things. One, like giving yourself plenty of time, and then 2, that consistent like habitual practice around land access. And then also like the more specific your land needs are, for example, you're starting in goat dairy, so you need a certain kind of infrastructure for that. Potentially the longer that your land access journey might take. That's not like a perfect formula, but that's largely what we think about. So now we'll go into the first step, which is prepare. And I think that this is the one that people often like completely blow past, because you might just start looking at listings or working with a realtor and start looking for that piece of land. Um, but this stage actually, I think, really helps you identify like what you're looking for specifically, and sets you up to like search for the right thing. And so we kind of compared this prepare stage to like if you were going to go on a hike, you would examine the skills that you have, the tools that you have, and you may use that to determine, am I going to go on like a 5-day backpacking trip versus a walk in the park? Two like vastly different options. Um, and so this part of the roadmap is the same. So we can go to the next one, Justin. Next slide. So these are kind of the things that you're assessing, and going through to come up with this like vision of what you're looking for. So the first one would be farming experience. So that's kind of the different, like aspiring farmer versus beginning farmer versus established. So looking at that, and thinking like, do I need more time as a farm employee or a farm manager before I enter into a lease agreement, um, or purchase property? Then you finance and skills inventory. So finances is obvious, like looking at your money and trying to determine what you can pay, what is going to allow you to continue to grow your farm business. And then skills inventory, like maybe if you're really good at carpentry, you can buy a property that doesn't have a house on it yet, and you're willing to buy your own house. Not for build your own house, not for me, but maybe for other people. And then the needs of your family or community, people who are important to you, considering that in the equation. Your farmland needs, so if you're starting a dairy versus a vegetable farm, your search area, and your access method. So examining all of these kinds of things to come up with what you're looking for. And so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of them, but first I'm going to share another story on the next slide. So this is Carolina of Blacksmith Acres. And so her land access journey is interesting. So she had a full-time job in Chicago, but was interested in starting to grow vegetables. And so she farmed at a community garden plot near her, and then got her friends to also get a bunch of other plots for her, so that she could have more community plots to grow on and gain more experience with growing vegetables. Then she found a plot to lease that was like an hour away. And so she was doing this like crazy trek back and forth from Chicago, and grew there for a year. And then through like this experience and growing vegetables and stuff, she had made a connection with Cliff McConville, who farms in Dundee, which is like an hour west of the city. And he runs a dairy out there. And so he has a farm store, doesn't have any vegetables. He only focuses on dairy and livestock. And so they were able to partner up, and he had like an acre of extra land and entered into a longer term lease with her. And she grows vegetables, has her own CSA, and sells at his farm store. So I share that story because we use this metaphor of thinking of land access as a ladder. And so instead of just like a one-stop shop of like, this is the one destination, there might be multiple arrangements, community garden to leasing to buying, whatever that ladder looks like for you. And also that it's hard to jump from like that bottom rung of the ladder to the top one. So trying to identify like what the steps, of gaining farming experience and the skills that you need and the money that you need, to get to that top rung of the ladder. And then next, I wanted to share this slide that has all of these different land access methods on it. So this is from a resource, I think called like Farmland Access Methods or something. And so you can see in these like different buckets, sole ownership, partial ownership, and then also we have like lease to own, land contract, all of these different things. So I share this because a lot of times people are only thinking about leasing and purchasing, but there's actually like a lot of different options. And you can like assess these different options in this prepare stage to try to figure out which one is best for your farm business. And so then on the next slide, we have like some of the factors that you would use to assess the different options. So it's these five that we often think about: security, building equity, affordability, flexibility, and best use of money. And so then on the next slide, we kind of break that down for leasing and purchasing. So for example, with regards to equity, a lot of people think purchasing versus leasing, which is essentially like renting. That you are only going to be building equity if you purchase. But there have also been some studies to show that because you're not pouring all of your money into a down payment when you would purchase versus leasing, that might allow you to have more money to invest in like infrastructure or tools or something, and grow your business that way. So and then like for purchasing, you would have taxes to pay versus leasing, you wouldn't. So kind of like trying to assess the multitude of options on this scale of these different things, to try to figure out which method is best for you at this particular stage of your farming career and your farm business. And then on the next slide, I wanted to touch on collective land access. So I'm going to share this link in the chat that is a compilation of resources around collective and cooperative land access. And a couple things that I wanted to highlight is that this can look like sharing land. So forming an LLC with multiple people to purchase land collectively. It can also look like sharing equipment or like a building, like a barn together, or like a pack shed, something like that. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is that the soft skill piece of this is as important. A lot of times people focus on like the legal piece, like how am I gonna purchase land with multiple people legally? And that's also an important piece to focus on. But a lot of times people forget that the soft skills of like how are we gonna have like non-hierarchical governance structures, nonviolent communication, conflict resolution, all of those things as well. Learning about those things in order to have a successful cooperative farming arrangement is really important. And then I wanted to share the story of the farmer in the corner, Hannah Breckbill at Humble Hands Harvest. So really awesome example of, she's based in Decorah, Iowa, and there was like a big pork poultry processing plant that wanted to come in and purchase land there. And the community as a whole decided, like, we do not want this giant pork processor here, and we want to support local farmers instead. And so the whole community purchased the plot of land. Hannah put in more money than most people. And so then she had like 25 shares. And then over time, she was able to buy the shares from the community members until she had bought them all out and owned the piece of land herself. So that gave her a slower path to purchasing the land and not having to come up with all of the money at once. It also like means that the community is invested in the land access piece, which I think is often important. Is like we have this framing that like land access is the farmer's issue. And it's like, well, that's not really true, because if there are no beginning farmers in your community, a lot of other things suffer. So how can we as a community care about increasing secure, affordable land arrangements for beginning farmers? And Hannah is like super open to talking about that model, and like sharing knowledge and stuff around that. So yeah, and then a couple other like there's the agrarian trust model. Those folks are also really open to sharing. So yeah, highly recommend like reaching out to some of those farmers directly or some of those organizations if that's something that you're interested in.
Jeannie, we have a question that popped in the chat box from Ellen. Do you have successful examples of machinery co-ops and non-contiguous plots?
Not that I can come up with immediately off the top of my mind. I feel like where I have most heard of that, Ellen, is with regards to fruit and nut production. So like a type of equipment that is only needed like one time of year, um, and is really specialized equipment. And I know that there are some folks doing that in Wisconsin and maybe in Southern Illinois. Um, but I can't give you a specific example, but I can think on it. Okay, and then I'm gonna go to this slide. Actually, don't I was gonna have us work through this worksheet, but I don't know if we're gonna have time. So I'm just gonna share it in the chat for you to work on with your own time. But this is like another example of how to think through all of these things. So this worksheet breaks it down into necessary, desirable, optional. And it goes through things like tenure, the location, infrastructure, housing. And so really trying to make you decide like what is absolutely necessary. Like I want to start dairy. Okay, I need a milking parlor for that. Like that would be absolutely necessary on my chart for this. I don't want to have to build my own. But then like maybe something like housing, you're thinking originally, maybe you think, yeah, that is necessary. And then you think, well, I might be willing to live in an RV on the property if there's not housing, or build my own cabin or something. It's the kind of thing that we see people working through, because sometimes you might have like everything in the necessary bucket of like, and then I also need a nice creek that runs through the property and all not be surrounded by corn and soy and like all of these wonderful things. But then you maybe start to realize that those are more desirable or even optional. So I think we'll skip the next slide. And then before, so then this is the next step in the journey. So if anybody has questions about the prepare stage that we just went over, feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute and ask them. We'll also have time at the end for questions, but I just wanted to take a second if you have questions about that stage in the land access journey to feel free to ask them. All right. Yeah, well, continue to drop them if they come up, but then if not, I'm going to start on the search part of the journey. So this is like after you have done that assessment phase, you have the idea of what you're looking for. Then we enter into the search part of the journey. And again, then kind of like coming up with a strategy and a plan for this part of the journey is really useful. So that is on the next slide. So these are the kinds of things to think through. The ways that you will search. So not just on Zillow or with a realtor. Both of those are great. But maybe you make like a PDF of your land search and put it in coffee shops around town or something like that. Maybe you're gonna like use listservs to spread the word about your land search. So making a list of all of those different ways that you will search. Having a system for tracking contacts, it seems obvious, but like if your search is gonna last 2 years, then trying to keep track of anybody who you've connected with who could be useful, and being able to find that person who like maybe you connected with a year ago. So like what's your system for tracking your contacts, build and use networks, attending all of the information and building good habits around your land search. So then on the next slide, I have a good example of two farmers who I feel like have a really strong search strategy. So this is Andy and Ashley of Sandhill Farm. They're based in Cincinnati, Wisconsin. And they have been farming an acre of land on like an incubator plot for the last 7 years. And their business is doing really well. And they've kind of maxed out their ability to grow on that property. So they kind of started like haphazardly searching for land over the last 3 years. And then realized that they really needed like a specific strategy for their search and that they needed to carve out time for one of them to put into the land search. And so I think that that's a really good example because it's easy and just like it's normal life to start the farming season in March, April, get to November and not have thought about the land access piece. But then, what if you need land for the next spring or something? So they decided at the start of their farming season that Andy would have an hour, 2 hours every single week to make sure to put into the search. And so like, what does that mean? Well, one, they have like a recurring advising call with us. So that's like one thing that they're doing for their search. Two, like looking at online listings and reaching out to the realtors that they're working with in Wisconsin and Illinois and asking if they found any other properties. Going out to visit properties takes time and like seeing how that goes, meeting with landowners, reading like resources about land access, and then meeting with folks at the Food Farm Finance Institute to help like get their books in order. All of those kinds of things, they take time. And so making sure that you have a plan for putting time into those things is really important to a successful search. And then
Jeannie, we've got a question in the chat box. Sure, where to go? Oh, there it is. From Alyssa, is there any farm incubation sites in Illinois?
yeah, so it's something we are lacking in Illinois at the moment. So there was Liberty Prairie Foundation that closed down. Windy City Harvest does have a program. But yeah, we've actually seen like multiple incubators shut down in the last like 2 years, which is not awesome. It seems like the best way to grow from like the farm employee. Yeah, Urban Growers Collective doesn't have their incubator program still. So they moved away from that model. And I'm not sure about Black Oaks. But it seems like the best way to grow from the like farm employee to something beyond that is either a farm manager position, which also there are not a lot of, or a small scale leasing option, like whether that's with maybe it's even on like another farm or something. But yeah, I would say right now, like how we talked about land access as a ladder is ideal. Um, but there aren't as many options for that in Illinois, in Northern Illinois. So something we got to work on. And then the next slide is, so yeah, still in this search part of the journey. And then wondering like, can you tell your story? So it feels like the community connections are super, super, super important in like a successful land access search. So beyond just like making the connections on Zillow or an online listing site, although that does work also for some people, a lot of the land access arrangements, whether sales or leasing, happen off of the market. So like one thing that I mentioned earlier that we've been working on with people is like creating a one pager PDF of their land search that tells specifics about what they're looking for, but also who they are, what their why is around farming, and then like disseminating those PDFs widely. So yeah, going tomorrow to like the Chicago Food Justice Summit, making connections there, like really getting tapped into the community and making people aware of your land search feels like a really good step. Really good and necessary step, I would say. And then on the next slide, we share this is our second tip that we talked about. So build, use, and contribute to your network. So I think it's like super useful to talk to other farmers about like what did your land access journey look like? Like if you know of somebody who was farming in the city and now is farming outside of the city, getting together with them and trying to figure out like how did that happen for you? What did that look like? What who was on your team? Where did you stumble? Like all of those kinds of questions is really useful. And then we share this picture, which is of a women's land circle. I think I just saw Claire jump on, but she helps host those. So they're women landowners who are coming together to talk about the stewardship of their land. And we share that to like think through where you might be able to tap into a network of like-minded people, and people who like there might be a larger number of them. So like land trust could be another good example. Connecting with your local land trust to see if they know of any landowners who have conservation easements on their property, for example. So yeah, really thinking through who's in your network, and who would you like to be in your network.
And Jeannie, I just wanted to do a time check for us. We've got about probably 5 more minutes, probably till we should move to Q&A. I just want to give you a heads up.
Okay. That's the speed. Okay. Then on the next slide, I have a quick list. Oh, it jumped forward again. The next slide is a quick list of like networks to tap into in Chicago around land access stuff. So NeighborSpace, Productive Landscape Project, Working Farms Fund, Chai Block Builder, Community Food Network, Navigator, any of those really good connections to make in Chicago. Okay, and then we'll go to the next one. So another tip for the search process is focusing your area of search. And so that ties into the community and tapping your networks and stuff, because focusing your area of search will help you know like what networks to tap into and spread your like news of your search in that area. And then on the next slide though, we have like a caveat to that tip, which is knowing when to pivot. So this is Beatrice. She runs Multiple Harvest LLC, ran her farm at the UGC incubator for the first 3 years, and then started looking for land and wanted to purchase land north of the city in McHenry County. And land is more expensive up there, but so she worked with a realtor, looked up there for like maybe at least a year, and then realized that that area wasn't going to work for her budget, and so then ended up needing to pivot and look south of the city, and then found property. So Beatrice has an awesome land search story, which I just shared in the chat, for more details on that. But I think just like a really strong example of like having a really narrow focus, and then she like really knew when it was time to adjust the structure that she was using for her search. Okay, and then the next slide we'll blast through is the secure part. So that is actually securing the whatever kind of land arrangement you've decided to pursue. And we can go to the next slide. So we wanted to share like a quick time saver kind of hack. And I just shared our webinar that we did on it, but using data to look at the soils on a property, or if there's a well there, if the land is in a floodplain, who owns the property, like finding a landowner's name and mailing address to reach out to them. Like all of those things are things that you can find online for free. And so it might save you time in like going out and looking at 5 different properties, which takes a ton of time. Maybe you'd be able to like use some of these tools to narrow down that 5 to 2, and save yourself a little bit of time. So if you're curious about how to use that, you can watch our webinar that I shared. And then I see the question. I'm going to come back to that one once we finish this part. So we can go to the next slide.
I got mixed up a little bit. The session goes to 11:15, so my apologies. Don't mean to rush you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. So then the next slide, just do your due diligence, always thinking like, what could possibly go wrong? And the answer is a lot. So talk to the neighbors. Yeah, use those online data tools to find maybe some things that the landowner's not telling you. Make sure that all of the boxes are checked. And I will say that I also feel like people always say that, make sure that all of your boxes are checked. And then it's like, what are the boxes even? That's how I feel. Cause I'm like, how am I going to make sure that they're all checked if I don't even know what the boxes are? So one of the resources that we're going to come out with this summer is buying rural farmland. And it goes through that like entire process of like checking the septic system, testing the well, like all of those kinds of things that if you've never had to do that before, you might not know to check. Well, we're coming out with that resource that's like 90 pages long this summer. And then the next slide briefly goes into building a good lease. a lot of times if you're working with a fellow community member or maybe another farmer, and you're leasing land, it seems like it could all be done in good faith, without anything in writing, but I feel like the lease is the place where you can really like actualize your values and write out risk and responsibility. Um, Unfortunately, it's just like you don't know when a relationship might go south. And so a lease can be whatever you want to make it. And yeah, is really the place that you're going to define the how the risk and responsibility is shared. And so it's really important to have those things in writing in case anything does happen. So we just want to say that there. And again, that's like a super brief overview of leasing. And if you have more questions, we're happy to work with you one-on-one, share resources on how to build a lease, all of those kinds of things. And then prepping a proposal. So this would be for like if you are going to be working with a landowner who has specifically asked for a proposal for their property, for like what you would want to do there, which is something that we see sometimes. And the point with this slide just being that to like really take that proposal seriously, include all of the details on there of like, yeah, kind of similar to a lease of like how risk and responsibility is going to be shared, what you would like to do this year, maybe in the future. A lot of times they'll provide like kind of a structure for that proposal, but we've kind of seen that sometimes it feels like that isn't taken as seriously, and then that opportunity can be lost with the landowner. So it of course like depends on, I don't know, your relationship with them, and like if it seems like they're bringing more of like a professional, structured vibe to the arrangement or something more loose, but I guess being able to like match what the landowner seems to be looking for. And then the last two, we don't have much to say on. The steward piece is mostly for if you're in a lease with a farmer or a landowner to continue to steward that relationship, but also like if you're in a cooperative farming arrangement, to continue to like steward those relationships and make sure that they're healthy, continue to steward the land, all of those kinds of things. And then the last one is future planning, which I know seems crazy to talk about. The retirement planning and the will, but we do work with landowners a lot as well, talking about succession and having a farm transfer plan. And that could come up if you're leasing, from like an aging landowner who like maybe there would be an opportunity to purchase the land in the future. I could see this part being relevant too. So yeah, those are the 5 steps of the journey. And then we go to our question slide and we're exhausted from talking about land access. So
Thank you, Jeannie. Now, going back to the question that Viviana asked about in your role, are you open to talking to folks that are interested in accessing land to establish agroforestry and ecology projects?
yeah, definitely. We have like partnered with the Savannah Institute too. So a lot of times, Viviana, thinking through like with that, especially there are people working on establishing agroforestry projects on like public land or leased land. Because a lot of times you would think that like neither of those provide the security that you need to do like perennials, but like Savannah Institute, for example, is working on like entering into like 50-year leases with landowners, and like having a format for that. to make the security piece of putting like fruit trees or something, nut trees on that property make sense. So yes, we would be definitely open to talking about that.
Other questions that you have, you can drop them in the chat box, or you can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, and we can have you come off mute to ask those questions for Jeannie.
Yeah, Jane, there is a FarmLink feature in Wisconsin. So the Farmland Access Hub does land linking, land access services in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and soon to be Michigan too. So the folks that I shared, Andy and Ashley, who are currently farming in Wisconsin, they are also working with that program there. So the only bummer is like if you're interested in looking at land in like Wisconsin and Illinois and Iowa, let's say, you might have to like work with multiple different people, but we can collaborate with them as well.
I have a question. So a lot of the land in Chicago, especially like the lots that you buy there, they need to be cleaned or they need tree removal. I was wondering if you had any tips or sites that could help with that.
Mm. I'm gonna crowdsource for that one if folks have any other answers to that. I'm not aware of any particular funding for that. It's making me think about Fresh, and I think that when they just shared their land access journey on an event that we did with Northern Illinois Young Farmers, and I remember that one of the city plots was relatively forested. So it might be good to connect with them and see if they were able to get any funding for that. I don't know. Does anybody else have suggestions?
Another question that we have in the chat box from Ellen: does Illinois FarmLink help with easements?
Good question. So for those not familiar, agricultural, oh, this is going to be hard, I guess, to describe briefly, but agricultural easements basically remove the development rights on the property. And so they make it cheaper, the land cheaper, because indefinitely, in most cases, you're not allowed to develop that property. And then there's like a set of things that you need to follow with regards to that easement. So like, yeah, you might only be able to build outbuildings on like a certain part of the land, but because those development rights are removed, the land is cheaper, especially if that property is like in a suburban area or like in one of those like 6 collar counties outside of the city where the development rights would be really high because there's a lot of suburban housing. So that exists, though. That's what the program, the Working Farms Fund, uses to make land more affordable for the beginning farmers that use that program. And it's a lot more technical and complicated than I'm saying right now. But we, Ellen, personally do not like hold easements or put easements on a property. So that would, yeah, that's usually like the local land trust that does that. American Farmland Trust also does. I don't know if there's anybody else here that has like more of an idea of who would hold those in the Chicago area. Feel free.
And we have a couple more questions. We also have about 10 minutes left in this session. What I am going to do is launch, we have 2 more polls to do. I'm going to launch our second poll for the session, and that while we're doing some of this Q&A, and then I'll launch our summit session feedback poll for general programming strategy.
And yeah, I'll just keep working through these.
Perfect, thank you.
So yes, Ellen, we could advise around easements. I'll share in the chat how to schedule an advising call with us. And yeah, like I said, it's free. We're willing to work with you throughout the land access journey. So it's not like just like a one and done call. And then banks that we would recommend working with is Compeer Financials. So those folks they have a really good beginning farmer program. Sometimes they recommend like working with them on maybe like an equipment loan or something smaller before like a land loan, like to purchase farmland, to kind of like build up that relationship with them and that rapport. But Compeer is the one that we would recommend. And then Alyssa asked, oh, it's spelled Compeer. Yeah, somebody just showed it. Nice. And then Alyssa just asked, how can I meet more folks or interested farmers to talk about land access journeys, which I think is a cue for me to share that the other area that I work in is with the Northern Illinois Young Farmers chapter. And we're working on building community across the urban, suburban, and rural Northern Illinois areas through social events. And we're hosting a happy hour tomorrow after the in-person summit day. We did just host like an event called the First 5 Years of Farming, where each farmer like shared their land access journey and we talked about barriers and stuff. So yeah, connecting with people in Northern Illinois young farmers is a great place to learn about other land journeys. Any other questions? Yeah, I just shared the webinar of where like Fresh shares their story. Somebody else like shares their story about buying a whole property that's forested and how that land was maybe cheaper from like the get-go because it was all forested rather than like prime farmland. And he decided that like worked out the financials that it made more sense to clear an acre of that property. And that property also happened to be like within biking distance of a metro and is surrounded by corn and soy, but because there's like such a large barrier with the trees, that kind of blocks his farm. So like another example of like a roundabout way, and an interesting way of structuring the land access piece.
Jeannie, are there any more slides you want to have us pull up here at the end?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, please get in touch. We can go through the specifics of your search, and I'll be at the summit tomorrow in person, wearing my Northern Illinois Young Farmers hat, but I'm always happy to talk about land access. It's my favorite topic, so.
Awesome. Jeannie, thank you so much for all the information and giving us these resources and the insight to the pathways for aspiring farmers and already who might have land that are looking for to move, relocate, or add on. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to keep our line open here for the next 3 or 4 minutes. If you have more questions, please drop them in the chat box or come off mute. And we do have the summit session feedback poll launched, so that's helpful if you all can complete that, so we can continue to information gather and data gather to be able to provide programming that is best meeting the community's needs, which is what the summit is about. So yeah, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jeannie, and I'll leave this space here open for us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Yeah.